As a sports fan, you've definitely heard this saying before. Defense wins championships. This seems to be one of those things that every analyst always says, but is it actually true? Is having an elite defense actually crucial to winning it all? Does having a good defense matter more than having a good offense? It turns out that this is not actually true, and I'll show you why in this video. What's up guys, welcome to Mdj. My name is Mark, and it's always fascinating me how certain sports sayings become popular and whether or not they're actually true. You know, people used to say you can't win with a three-point shooting team. Obviously, the Warriors destroyed that argument, but one that still remains is defense wins championships. So there's no better way to analyze the statement by looking at the teams that have actually won the championship and how good they were defensively compared to the rest of the league. If you're a hardcore NBA fan, you've probably heard before that the only team in the past 20 years to win the championship with a non-top 10 defense were the 0-1 Lakers, and the only other team in the past 38 years with a non-top 10 defense were the 1995 Houston Rockets. Both these are slight anomalies, however. The 0-1 Lakers really turned up their defense in the playoffs, and the 1995 Rockets weren't so much a bad defensive team as they were just an overall bad regular season team. I'm gonna plug my 1995 Houston Rockets video that you should watch after this one. It's a really cool story about how a 6-seed team won the championship. Anyways, back to the topic. People compare this to the other side where there have been 5 non-top 10 offenses to win the championship. So it would seem to suggest that it's true, you need an elite defense to win the championship and not so much an elite offense. But then again, what defines an elite defense or offense? What if we take top 8 instead of top 10? The people who watch this channel, you guys know how I feel about the number 10. It's way overused in basketball. So when you take top 8, you realize that out of the past 38 championship teams, there were 2 teams ranked 10th in defensive rating and 4 teams ranked 9th in defensive rating. So that gives you a total of 8 non-top 8 defenses that have won the championship. And then you take non-top 8 offenses, and hey, lo and behold, there are actually more non-top 8 defenses to win the championship than there are non-top 8 offenses. The whole point of what I just did is just to show that the non-top 10 defense argument is a bit arbitrary and it's easily manipulated by the small sample size that is the 38 championships. So, okay, let's choose something that is not arbitrary, which is the average. If you take the average offensive rating ranking and average defensive rating ranking of all 38 championship teams, you end up with an average 5.39 rank for offense and a 5.21 rank for defense. The difference is basically negligible. In basketball, what wins games is not holding the opponent to a low amount of points. It's quite simply point differential. You score more points than the opponent, you win. If you hold them to 80 points, but you can only score 70, you lose. If you let them score 120, but you can score 130, you win. Intuitively, the better your defense is, the more leeway you have on offense, and the better your offense is, the more points you can afford to give up on defense. And almost always, you need to be really good at one or the other to contend. If you're really good at both, like your top 3 in both offense and defensive rating, you're basically guaranteed to win the championship. If you're number 1 at both, then you're the 96-72 win Chicago Bulls. There's just no statistical evidence to back up the claim that defense matters more when it comes to winning championships. Everything points to what we already intuitively know about basketball, and that's point differential, which, you know, is like the most fundamental rule in basketball. So then this got me wondering, how did this even come about? Like, why do we even have this saying in the first place? So I did some more research around this saying and I came up with a couple reasons about why we have this misconception. Number 1 is that this saying likely comes from other sports. Me personally, I don't watch baseball, I don't watch hockey, I don't watch soccer, I watch a little bit of football, but I can't speak to those other sports because I just don't know. But if it is true in some other sport, then there's definitely a little bit of rub-off effect because most NBA fans do watch other sports. Number 2 is interesting. So in the book Scorecasting by Tobias Moskowitz and John Wertheim, they quote Jordan, who after winning his first championship in 1991, saying defense wins championships when asked how he overcame the championship hurdle. In 1997, Jordan again said after beating the Supersonics, defense wins championships. And again in 1998, after his 6th and final ring, he said defense wins championships. What's funny though is that in 1991 and 1997, when he said those things, his team was the number 1 offense in the league, but only the 7th and 4th best defense in the league respectively. Just wanted to point that out. Obviously, Jordan was not the first to say defense wins championships, but he was the most popular athlete in the 90s, not just in the NBA, in all of American sports. And when you have one of the biggest champions and all-time winners in the history of sports saying this, it's probably going to make the saying more popular. Another reason was the 2004 Pistons. They were one of the greatest defensive teams of all time, but only the 18th ranked offense, which is the worst offense to ever win the championship in modern NBA history. And this is a pretty significant outlier. Not only did they win, they beat the Lakers super team with Kobe, Shaq, Gary Payton, and Karl Malone. So after they won it, it just furthered the discussion of how having an elite defense is all that matters. Basically, there are two things at play here. One is outlier bias, which is that we overvalue outlier situations such as the 2004 Pistons having a below average offense. And two is confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. So basically, whenever a good defensive team performs well, then using our existing notion of how defense wins championships, we use that to justify why they won the championship. If I could explain confirmation bias in another way, confirmation bias is basically the operating system of conspiracy theorists who like to nitpick evidence and overhype stuff just to make their illegitimate points. And this brings us to the last reason why I think people, and especially coaches, always say defense wins championships. It's because defense is more controllable than offense. I think there are a couple things we can all agree upon as basketball fans. First off, effort matters more on defense than on offense. You can turn yourself into a good defender by putting in 100% effort. You can't really make yourself a good offensive player by just playing hard. 2. Defense requires more teamwork and cooperation. On offense, you can have 4 unengaged people, but if you have one really good player, he can create offense for you and you can survive offensively. But on defense, if you have one person who's not engaged, you're basically screwed, especially in the NBA with all the switching and double teaming and pick and rolls and stuff. Communication is much more important on defense. That's why coaches usually care more about defense than offense. From their perspective, they know that offense often comes down to whether or not a player simply makes a shot. But on defense, it's consistent communication and being engaged and putting in effort, which is more controllable. Also on offense, players are very different. Some are good at shooting, some can penetrate and draw double teams, some can post up, so it's really hard to give general advice to a team offensively. But on defense, players are much more systematized. You're like a cog in the system. When this happens, you rotate here. When that happens, you play help defense, etc. When I was doing research for this video, I also came across this theory of how defense may be more important than offense because when you cause a live ball turnover, so basically a steal or block that stays in bounds, you create a fast break, and obviously fast breaks are offensively much more efficient than playing in the half court. And it makes total sense until you realize that the flip side is also true. If it's important to create live ball turnovers on defense, then it's equally important to not commit live ball turnovers on offense. Even if you can find certain aspects in basketball where defense matters more, I can point to aspects where offense matters more. For example, I would argue that late in games, especially in the playoffs, when things tighten up, it's much more important to have a dominant offensive player and shot creator like Kobe or Kyrie because good offense always beats good defense. The point is this, intuitively and backed by statistics, basketball is ultimately a sport that is equally played on both ends of the floor. There are certain aspects of defense that make it more controllable and more representative of a team's cohesiveness, and thus is something more intangibly valuable, but it doesn't necessarily make it more important than offense. So yeah, it's technically true. Defense does win championships. The thing is, offense wins championships as well.